Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's weekly live immigration attorney chat here with Immigration for Couples. If you're new to our channel or our Facebook page, I'm attorney Megan Pastrana. I'm the owner and CEO of Immigration for Couples. And we host these weekly live chats to provide you with important information and tips for couples who are going through the U.S. immigration process. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the comments, and I'm happy to answer those. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, or if you're watching this on the replay, please put a hashtag replay. And if you have questions, please feel free to put those in as well. And that'll give us ideas of what topics and what is information that you're wanting to know as you're going through your immigration journey. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Awesome. Yay, Daniel. I see you're here live with us today. You do a lot of hashtag replays. And so I'm excited you get to be here live. All right, so we can go ahead and dive into the topics that I have. Okay, so top consular interview questions for spouse and fiancé visas. I'm getting a lot of questions about this, and it's, of course, when we are meeting with couples, when they're getting to that final stage and they're having their interview for their spouse visa, or if they're in the middle of the process, it'll be the middle of the process if you're going through a fiancé visa. Everybody wants to know, what questions will I be asked? What will the consular officer ask me? It's, of course, I know, unnerving to be on the hot seat, to be in front of an immigration officer and have to answer questions about your relationship. So that question makes sense. And so I'd like to go over some of the top questions that we see. But before I go over those questions, if you've been watching my channel, you know I like to go back a little bit and give you a 30,000-foot view of exactly what I'm talking about and where it happens in the process. I know immigration law can be complex and confusing, and so I want to make sure you're tracking with me and we're on the same page. So part of the spouse visa process and part of the fiancé visa process involves an interview at a U.S. embassy or consulate abroad. And the purpose of that interview is for the consular officer to ask you questions about your immigration history, about your background, because they're doing a final check to make sure that they believe you have a real relationship, and also to make sure that you're eligible to receive that visa. That interview is a little different, a lot different rather than the adjustment of status interview. And so I know a lot of couples get online and looking up, what is an immigration interview? What can I expect? And there's a type of interview that happens in the U.S., and both members of the couple attend that interview and are asked questions. And that's where those common questions of what is your favorite color and what is their favorite food can come into play. But at the U.S. embassy or consulate, only the immigrant beneficiary is being interviewed. There are some circumstances in which there'll be a second interview and a petitioner would be called in for that interview. I won't get into the weeds of that, but in general, this interview at that U.S. embassy or consulate involves just that immigrant beneficiary. So the questions are going to be a little different because they don't have you both there to confirm favorite color and favorite food. The questions are really going to come from the DS-260 application or the DS-160 application. That's an application that's filed online as part of the process. And the immigration officer also has your immigration file from USCIS. So if you had filed your I-130 petition for a spouse visa, or if you filed your fiancé visa, the I-129F petition, and they'll have copies of that and all of your evidence. They'll have your entire immigration history in front of them. So the questions will come from those applications. Some of the main questions that they will start with is really just some background biographic information. Really, the questions aren't meant necessarily to trick you. That's information that they expect that you would know. For example, your spouse or fiance's full name, their date of birth. If it's a spouse visa, when was your date of marriage and where? A fiancé visa, they would likely be asking, when was your first meeting and when was your most recent meeting in person? And then they would move on to questions. They can ask questions about your relationship. And those questions would really come from evidence that's already been submitted in your application. So they might see photos, or they might have information from your I-130 and I-129F about a joint bank account or something of that nature. And so they could ask you, do you have any accounts together? And because they have that evidence, they see, that you had submitted a joint bank account statement. So those would be some other questions based on the evidence and that prior application. that was filed. And then they would ask you background questions. They'll move into questions about prior visa applications, if you had a prior tourist visa or student visa. And then the final set of questions usually involves screening questions. They're eligibility questions. They ask everyone these questions. So don't be alarmed. There'll be serious questions about have you ever harmed someone? They're, like I said, they're very serious. Harmed someone, murdered someone, been involved in a terrorist organization, drug trafficking. They have a list of screening questions that they have to ask everyone. Now, with that kind of those different categories and the types of questions that would be asked, it's also important to understand that the consular interview actually is something that happens fairly quickly. The actual interview itself is something that happens fairly quickly. I know I tell our clients, be prepared for anywhere between, 5 to 15 minutes for the interview. And a lot of them will come back and say, it felt like it was just a couple minutes. And that's not everybody's experience. It always, the famous words of any attorney, especially immigration attorneys, it really depends. It depends on your case. It depends on your immigration history. If that immigration officer will need to be asking you more detailed questions. But in general, it's a fairly quick interview, and those are the questions they'll be going over. It is important to review your applications and to have dates basically committed to memory, because if there are contradictions in your responses and in the application, that can cause issues. But in general, those are the top questions, the common questions that we see at consular and embassy interviews. So I hope that helps.